Welcome to this month's Commissioner's Corner. I'm Kendra Sowers, the North District School Commissioner here in Burlington, and I am delighted to be joined by two Vermont legislators, Senator Gulick and Representative Stone. We are talking about education reform, the hot button topic in the legislature this year. So before we dive deep into the bills and what's going on, I would love for you both to introduce yourselves and let us know what committees you're serving on.
Great. Would you like to start?
Yeah, sure. I'm Representative Mary Catherine Stone. I am one of two representatives for Chittenden 14, and I currently serve on House Government Operations and Military Affairs, but last biennium I served on House Education.
Excellent, thank you. I am Senator Martine LaRocque-Ulick. I represent Chittenden Central District, which is most of Burlington, Winooski, the city of Essex Junction, most of Essex Town, and a little tiny sliver of Colchester. I serve on the Vice Chair of Health and Welfare in the morning, and in the afternoon I'm on the Finance Committee. And I was co-chair of the School Redistricting Task Force this past summer. And I was a high school teacher for many years, and I was on the Burlington School Board for 8 years with my friend Kendra here. And so have a lot to say about education in the state of Vermont.
Great, thank you. Welcome to both of you. So Vermont education, obviously reform, has just been a huge issue these past couple years. We've had rising property taxes, we've had very high healthcare costs, declining enrollment, and there's just been some questions on, is this the structure that we want for our education system, and how can we keep excellence in our education system and maybe help lower the cost? So as a school board member, of course, this is near and dear to my heart, so I appreciate talking about it right now. I wanted to start a little bit with some background about what happened last year, because I think it's so important to talk about last year because it really sets the stage for the bills that are currently in the legislature. So last July, Governor Scott signed Act 73 into law, and I wanted to have you guys talk a little bit about that. I know there's some components like the foundation formula, which, you know, moving Vermont to a foundation formula, redistricting, which you were the chair of the task force for. So, and talk about like increased state oversight, all these things that were talked about in this bill. So do you guys want to talk about that?
Sure.
I think maybe it should go back further than that, though.
I do too.
Honestly.
I do
Great.
too. That's what I was going to say.
454?
Go back to
So-
the political machinations that led to it. And
my first
yeah.
biennium, I was on House Education Committee, so that was 2022 when I was elected, so 23, 24. And there were a lot of other things that were highlighted in the legislature at the time, valid things, housing, health care. But I felt like on the Education Committee that I was constantly just waving a flag saying, this ship is sinking and people need to pay attention to this. And people were like, yeah, it's important, but it's fine. We have other fires to put out. And then the votes came out in 2024 across the state, showing that school board budgets were getting voted down all across the state. And so it was no longer me waving a flag and saying I'm rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic, but like the Titanic is going under. Like we are underwater right now. So this conversation has needed to happen for a while. I hate that it took this long for public education to be in the spotlight, but it's high time that it is.
yes, I would totally agree with Mary Catherine. I think I've never been as fearful as I am today for the future of public education in the state, in the country. I'm really scared, I have to be honest. The more I read about what's going on across the country, the more concerned I am. And the more concerned I am about public education, it seems like it's tied to our democracy, and so I get this like existential dread. But that said, hopefully we can do some good work here in Vermont. I will say I believe, and I don't know if Mary Catherine agrees, but I do believe there was a political component to how we ended up with H454, which became Act 73, which was that the Democratic supermajority suffered a lot of losses in that 24 election.
The largest turnover out of any legislature in the
U.S.
U.S.
country, exactly. So our reaction to that was, oh my gosh, we misread the voters, we misread the landscape. We need to, this is again my interpretation, we need to follow the lead of our extremely popular governor. And so we sort of punted to the governor, who then said, property taxes are the problem. We need a new funding formula in education. We need bigger districts. So he came out with this proposal. And for me, it's very unfortunate because the legislature kind of relinquished their control to the governor, who has wanted to reform education for a long time. You may remember back when Dan French was proposing a single district for the state of Vermont. That was extremely unpopular. But so it's been sort of brewing for a long time. So that's sort of like the landscape that we were in. Would you say that's accurate?
Right, and preying on people's fear. And yes, there are definitely some changes that need to happen because the system that we have right now is not sustainable, and I feel like it's not serving the children of Vermont as it could, and it's definitely not sustainable for the taxpayers. But the urgency behind the governor's message, it just feels like a lot of it stems from preying on people's fear instead of leaning in and being honest about the real concerns that are there. But
yeah, I agree. And I would also say the problem with the governor's proposal was that it didn't address underlying costs and the costs that are really driving property taxes, which, I mean,
right.
Healthcare costs.
Yep.
Basically school construction, right? There's so much deferred maintenance that our
Right.
construction costs keep going up. Some of us have taken out debt to build new facilities. So that all goes into the ed fund, not to mention the increased mental health costs that we had with COVID, as well as like weaning ourselves off ESSER and ARPA money that came to us from the federal government. So it was a perfect storm, not to mention inflation. Right?
Right.
So it was a perfect storm of a lot of factors, but none of which were addressed by the governor's proposals.
Right.
So
yeah, so that's what I'm saying. Instead of like leaning in and getting curious about those things that I think will have more of a long-term impact on both the taxpayer and the student, it was just more preying on fear and coming up with these quote quick fixes, which I truly believe will end up doing more harm than good to both the taxpayer and our students.
agreed.
Good. Thanks for that perspective. So let's talk about the bills that are in the legislature right now, because I think given that full landscape of what you guys just talked about, you guys have had the task of like, how are we going to implement Act 73, right? That is really like, what are we looking at here? So I know the House they passed the bill, H 955.
That's right.
And it was sent over to the Senate. And so I would love to dive into that. I'd love to know what's in that bill, what differs from the House and the Senate versions, and how you see that influencing public education.
I think we need to go back in the time machine once more because out of Act 73, I didn't vote yes on the bill. You can go back and look at the roll call votes and watch me on camera saying no. But something that I did appreciate about the bill is it set up something called a redistricting task force so that people could really dig in and look at data and hear from Vermonters and really research some of these bigger topics to make sure that we were moving forward in a meaningful and impactful way. And you were vice chair, or you were co-chair of the redistricting task force. So I think it'd be important to talk about the work you did.
Yeah, I agree. I was going to set that, and then I was going to set the stage there. So I think one of the things the legislature realized when it was crafting 454 and then ultimately Act 73 was that they didn't have time to come up with these new districts that were kind of the foundation of that bill. You couldn't have a foundation formula, which is a whole new way of doing education finance in the state of Vermont, until you had these new bigger districts, because a foundation formula works much more efficiently in larger districts with more students and with grand list values that are sort of meshed together to be more close together. So what happened was they created this task force to come up with these new districts. We had a total of 4 months, which really was 3 months because we needed the last month to write the report, which it's a 173-page report. It's pretty hefty. So the 3 months to do these new districts, and it became clear quite quickly that with all the qualifiers that were in the bill, and I don't remember exactly how many, I think it was something like 14 or 15 qualifiers. You had to look at grand list, you had to look at demographics, you had to look at geography, you had to look at transportation, you had to look at free and reduced lunch numbers, grand list values, all of these things. It was like we couldn't, how can we do this in 3 months? I mean, it just became just a task that wasn't going to be possible. And frankly, given the geography and the rural nature of Vermont, what we really needed was to hear from people on the ground, people in communities, because they had local knowledge that came to us that was shocking. Like, yes, there's a road from these houses to this school, but you can't get to it in the winter. You can't drive this road, or this road doesn't have a bridge to go over this river. And so there's all these really small but important factors that meant a kid could get to school or not get to school. So we heard from over 5,000 Vermonters.
Can you say that number again? I think it's important.
5,000,
Yeah.
over 5,000. We went around the state and heard directly from people at our hearings. We also had people come to our meetings and give public comment. And then we took hundreds and hundreds of emails from folks, and they sent in their comments. So it was robust, and it was loud and clear that Vermonters don't want forced mergers. They don't want these large forced districts. That was one thing that was constant. No matter what people thought otherwise, that was a constant. Because there were a lot of differing opinions, but nobody wanted forced mergers. So that kind of set the stage for us to come up with an alternative plan, which I'll just briefly say has to do with what we call CSAs, which are cooperative education service areas, which are basically an ability for Vermont, which again is very rural and has a pretty small population. It allows us to create economies of scale. And they exist in about 42 states. Some are more successful than others, but they, especially in rural states, they are very good at creating these economies of scale. Yep. So that you can work with neighboring districts to provide transportation, professional development, special education services. So, and they're not a governance structure. They are literally just an administrative body that does ordering, let's say, right?
And even in big districts like Burlington,
yeah,
you could
absolutely.
see
We already
economies
do
of
this
scale.
in like
Absolutely.
healthcare, and it saves money. And ironically, the governor supports it when it's used in healthcare to save money. But when it comes to education, it is seen as this big, scary thing that doesn't make sense. But it's not a new idea. It actually was renamed CSAs. It was formerly called BOCES, Boards of Cooperative Education Services. Those were put in place as a pilot during my first biennium. And there's one in the state of Vermont already. It's in southern Vermont and the Woodstock area, and it's already yielding great results. They also yield cost savings. Because some of the big things that you just said are major cost drivers. Special education, for example, is a huge reason that schools' budgets are going up, because you want to and you must meet the needs of kids who have special education requirements, but a lot of those things cost a lot of money. For example, I'm an occupational therapist. I have worked with kids in our public school systems providing special education. My services aren't cheap. Doesn't mean it trickles down to me, but I'm just saying it costs the school money to provide occupational therapy to kids. And there's not a ton of us. There aren't a ton of us. And it makes sense to work smarter, not harder. And this CSA model, or BOCES model, formerly BOCES, would allow multiple schools to use one occupational therapist to go around and provide services, instead of each school having to find an occupational therapist and hire them to work with kids in that one particular school. So it helps make sure. I like CSAs and I like BOCES because it, two birds, one stone. It makes sure that kids are getting the supports that they need, but also it reduces costs. It's a win-win.
Yeah.
And it's not like we invented this. Like you said, 42 other states have them.
Yep.
in red and blue states.
Yeah, absolutely. I would just add, it's called the Vermont Learning Cooperative, which is the one in near the Woodstock area, and they, exactly as Mary Catherine said, they save anywhere from 5 to 40% on costs across the board.
That's great.
And a big surprise, as you said, is that they've actually seen their outcomes improve. They actually weren't, they knew they were going to save money, they didn't know that their outcomes were going to increase, and so they're really happy to see that. So,
And I'm really glad you raised that point, because I think so much of this discussion is how do we save money?
yes.
Yeah.
And educational opportunities, and being sure that every kid has these opportunities for success, and whatever that looks like, and the supports that they need. These are also the conversations, and I think these shared services are such a great way of providing that for our students. Do you know how long it would take to get the cost savings when you set up those shared services for districts?
We should start seeing cost savings year 2.
Yes.
Okay, year 2, that's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, that's exciting.
Yeah.
It is exciting.
And the cost savings will increase for 4 to 5 years. At some point, it does. History shows us that it does plateau, but still, in those 5, 6, or up to 10 years of savings, you've possibly cut, like I said, 40%.
Okay, that's
So
great.
we'll see. I mean, I don't want it to be. I don't think people should think of it as a panacea. It's not going to fix everything, but again, it will create economies of scale. It will save money, and the hope is, especially around something like special ed, we will have improved outcomes.
That's great.
Yeah, yeah. So there we are. So
then that's really feeding into then coming back to this legislative session because I know that seesaws are part of the House bill.
Yes.
That was part of the education bill, which is awesome. So that made it from the task force into the House bill, which
is really great.
That's a win. That's a big win. So
Yeah.
thank you for that.
And I will say, House Education did propose maps. They did propose a map. It was all school districts, so they sort of had done away with supervisory unions, and they came up with a map. I think they only got 2 votes in their committee on that. So it's, again, the lack of popularity and buy-in for these forced mergers is just not there, which, I mean, I could have told you that after my work with this task force, but I think the legislature had to feel it and see it and experience it themselves.
Yeah. And I think that dichotomy of like the forced merger versus the voluntary, right?
Right.
We want local control, we want to choose. Like I think Vermonters, that's what has been expressed through so much of this. Is like, I don't want to lose local control to have it be all like state oversight.
Yes.
Super important.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So I would say the very high level, the 3 things that came out of our task force report, seesaws was sort of the big piece. The other 2 were strategic mergers, which are incorporated in this bill. There are definitely places in the state that need to merge because they, again, don't have the numbers, they don't have the resources, and merging will actually be a real benefit to them. And then we have other parts of the state, like Washington County, where we called that being overschooled. They have 5 or 6 high schools, all within 10 to 15 miles of each other. Montpelier, U32, Barry, Harwood, Moortown. So almost too many high schools.
Right.
And that is an example of they should be able to come together and probably, take some of their school buildings and turn them into something else.
Yep.
So, which, as we all know, we need housing and other community centers, so that could be a great opportunity there. And the last part of our report was around high schools, regional high schools. So high schools that could serve a larger geographic area that would include a tech center, and that would be on the bigger side. So maintaining small elementary schools, larger middle schools, and then regional high schools.
And those regional high schools being able to offer more.
Exactly.
Better educational opportunities for a greater amount of students.
But all of that would also require us to look into our school construction, which we have had a moratorium on a state-funded school construction program since 2007.
That's a big part of this bill.
That is a huge part of this bill. And in the task force, you touched on that too, because when you talk about these regional high schools and repurposing some of these other high schools, if communities decide to consolidate and merge, that will require some funding for that construction to happen.
Burlington is very knowledgeable on
Burlington
that
knows
lack
this
of school
topic
construction,
very
right?
well.
For our bonding of our new
It
high
was
school.
one of the reasons why I ran 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Was what happened to us in Burlington, which was very difficult to say the least. You know, as I dug into it, I realized we had the second oldest school portfolio in the country, and that our school buildings were woefully neglected.
Yeah.
Not just here in Burlington, but across the state. So it really, I was like, we need to do something about this, and that was basically why I ran to begin with.
Which is great, because this aging infrastructure,
Yeah.
and it right now is only on, like, our bond is only on the Burlington taxpayers.
Correct.
Where it's normally shared. And most other states, red and blue, throughout the United States have some kind of state construction
Yeah,
aid.
that was really eye-opening
Yeah.
to me. I come from the state of Alabama, and a lot of people made commentary that I must be so happy that I'm in Vermont because, you know, I'm away from the South and away from Alabama. And the thing is that I never had to worry with my school buildings falling apart in Alabama. We may not have the highest test scores down there, but our schools are not falling apart. So
Interesting.
I was
Right.
like, we do have you beat on that.
Yeah, and I do just want to say, you're right, the bulk of the cost of the high school is borne by Burlington residents, but it is part of education spending. So it is,
Yes.
to a certain extent, it is borne by the whole state.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's a plan put forth in the bill that came out of the House for there to be a framework for statewide school construction aid and planning with a more phased-in approach. But
Which is great. Long overdue.
yes, which
Yeah.
is another reason I supported this bill as it moved through the House.
That's great.
Yeah, the school construction piece in the bill is very exciting. Unfortunately, there isn't money assigned to it yet, so that's something that we need to figure out. I did propose a couple bills this year in the Finance Committee to start funding school construction, but they did not go through. So it does feel a little bit aspirational. Let me put it that way.
It does, but I'm just happy to see that it's in there and people are recognizing that there's a lack of assistance and aid right now, and that needs to change. And the House feels like it definitely needs to change before we start putting together any kind of funding formulas or moving forward with any long-term plans, because we recognize that where are you going to educate these kids? If the school buildings are literally falling apart and it's on the taxpayers of the town, that's not a sustainable way to go about doing your business.
That's right. So also as part of this bill, there's a foundation formula, right? Moving Vermont to the foundation formula. And of course, as a school board member, I'm concerned about what that number will be and what the weights will look like in the foundation formula. I think it's been moved to 2030, is that correct?
That is what the House.
That's what they're proposing.
Yes, what the
Nothing's
House is
written in
proposing.
stone. We all know that. So can you tell me a little bit more about the formula and the weights? Has there been discussion on that?
There is a report that is happening right now. So there is a group of folks, educational experts, who are working on a report. We love reports in the legislature. We mandate them all the time. But we won't know, at least speaking for myself, I don't feel like I will have a good grasp on exactly what's in the foundation formula until we get that report back, which is going to be in early 27.
Yep.
So when we get that report back, we can see what they're recommending for a base amount and what they're recommending for the weights.
Okay.
Until then, it is, I don't know. I don't know what to say about the foundation formula. I'm very skeptical of a foundation formula myself for a variety of reasons. One being that if you look at the precedent that we set with school construction in 2007, we had no problem just stopping it and never picking it back up again, which is not a good precedent. And I worry that we could do that with the foundation formula. Because the foundation formula is going to sit in Montpelier and not in the hands of local voters, they will be very powerful and they will be able to overfund it, underfund it, appropriately fund it, we don't know. So that gives me a little bit of pause. We still haven't solved the problem of public dollars going to private schools that don't have to follow the same rules. So there's a lot that we haven't fixed, and that worries me.
The House,
Yeah.
did try to slow this down as much as possible, which I was happy about, just to see the importance of, yes, people are hurting, like, don't I know it looking at my own tax bills the past few years, but we need to move forward with intention and thought and looking at research and data and also listening to Vermonters. So in the House version, yes, we made sure that things wouldn't take effect into 2030, and then we added even more conditions that have to be met first, and those include that a merger vote process must be completed, a new cost factor formula must be delivered and analyzed, and the legislature must address outstanding issues like sparsity, special ed funding, CT, and transportation. That's basically our way of saying we're not ready to flip the switch yet, but it's now in the Senate's hands, and it's in your committee in particular, so we will stay tuned to see how that shakes out.
It just moved out of the Education Committee, now it's in the Finance Committee.
Okay.
And I mean, and to be clear, there was never anything in the governor's proposal that would save money. Like, there was never anything in there that was going to lower property taxes. As much as that is the drum that he beats, there is nothing in that bill to lower costs.
That's why I'm concerned about the foundation formula, because the only way, when I looked at that, the only way is that foundation formula is too low, is set so low that it's going to save money. So that is, as a school board member who sets the local budgets every year, that is a huge concern.
And we know that, you're doing as much as you can. Schools are cutting things to the bone, and it really impacts our students. And if we're not addressing those long-term cost drivers, things like construction, special education, goes on and on and on, then we're just putting a Band-Aid on a festering, infected wound. Awful to say that, sorry, I'm in healthcare, but that's what I think of every time. Something else that's been brought up is that property tax buy-downs, that's not a sustainable solution, but that is what the legislature has done time and time and time again because of this, emergency situation that we find ourselves in. The House proposed that we use half of our funds to do a property tax buy-down this year and the remainder next year, and the Senate is proposing that we do everything this year. And that's just going to, yes, it'll make people maybe feel good in the immediate, but that means that the following year, people are going to get hit literally twice as hard. And the thing that's not being said that I think should be said over and over again is that there's a lot going on federally right now that's impacting Vermont. We're not seeing the dollars that we used to see, not only because those COVID-era funds are no longer in existence, but we're seeing a very aggressive federal administration that's cutting things left and right. Every single day you open the news and you see programs and things that the Trump administration has cut, especially in regards to education and his devaluing of public education in America. So we are entering uncharted territory, and territory that I don't feel comfortable being in. So if the Senate chooses to do the full buy-down this year, not only is that going to be just bad fiscal policy, but next year we are not going to have the money that we have now even. It's really
it's very scary.
riskier than it ever has been.
Huge fiscal cliff
Yeah,
next year then.
I appreciated the House's approach, by the way. I really thought that was measured and made sense, and I do worry about, I was one of the 2 no votes in Senate Finance to our proposal, which is to use the full buy down this year, over $100 million. So Ruth Hardy and I, it was Ruth's idea, but I certainly went along with it. She did take some of the buy-down money to put toward rental assistance. Yeah. So some of that will go to helping renters, but it's a small amount and it'll have a little impact, but not a huge impact. So we both were not, we really struggled with the approach that we took in the Senate.
Yeah. And do you have any other differences that you see right now between the House and the Senate version of the bill?
Excess spending threshold is something that's been brought up. I mean, again, I just said I know that school boards are cutting things down to the bone, and it's because we're not really addressing those underlying concerns that are making things rise and rise and rise and rise. No matter how much you cut,
that's right,
things are still rising. And so I just want to make sure I get the numbers right. The House proposed to hold that at $118,000, and the Senate proposed to bump it down to 112%.
Yeah,
not thousand.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's another
That
difference.
so the
It has
bill's going to
brought
go
up
to
some
conference committee.
Yep.
And we all saw what happened last year with the conference committee and the drama around that. I don't know who will be on those committees this year. Hopefully it'll be a different makeup, but I don't know. So stay tuned, because the conference committee will be very important in negotiating those fine details
right.
and disagreements.
And do both those bills, or both the House and Senate version, have the bond, if you bonded like for our high school, so for Burlingtonians, is that separate?
The legacy debt,
The
is that what
legacy
you're
debt,
referring to?
yes, the
That's
legacy
definitely
debt.
in the House version. That was another reason that even though the bill wasn't, perfect, it's a mammoth bill. I didn't expect to like every little part in it. It was in the House version.
We kept it in the Senate version, but we lowered the amount that, so the House was very generous in what they
Yes.
were going to offer, and we made it less generous in the Senate. But it's still in there. Yeah, legacy.
is in there.
Yeah,
Okay.
it is. But not only legacy debt, but paying back retroactively, to districts who've taken out
Making
debt.
sure that people aren't punished twice is basically what the House was protecting people from, recognizing that, we are paying old debt from previous projects, but also entering this new regionalized system that could carry more debt. So that was our way of protecting schools like ours from being punished twice.
Yeah, if we're asking districts to merge, we want to make sure that it's, one district can't say, well, we don't want to merge with you because you've got all of this debt, and even though you do have a new building, so that we're trying to level the playing field there. So, but yeah, do you want to talk more about the bill itself and how it's going to, the mechanism? Again, it's not set in stone, but what's going to happen is that so right out of the gate, the cooperative that I mentioned earlier, the Vermont Learning Collaborative down in Woodstock, is sort of going to help facilitate these 7 CSAs, Collaborative Education Service Areas, and they are going to hire a facilitator in each one, get it up and running, and there is going to be some investment by the state to make sure that they have the resources that they need to get up and running.
That's right.
And in the meantime, that facilitator is working on local school boards to get together and meet and start a process to look at merging. So there are these areas, they're separate from the CSAWs, but there are these districts that are put together. They need to study whether or not it's feasible to merge.
And we have a timeline
They
set
have
out for
2
those
years.
conversations to happen. Like
Yeah.
there's a list of,
Okay.
by this date you should have,
exactly.
a facilitator hired to organize and run the process. By this date you should have your first meeting. Like it's very.
And is this in
Scripted
the
out.
next fiscal year? Or
Yes.
What? Okay.
The
what's
first
timeline?
step actually starts in, the House version proposed that by October of this year, 8 facilitators would be hired to organize and
that's
run the
same.
process. So yes,
Okay,
it's the
so
same.
A
So
quick
pretty
time-
soon.
It's coming. Then.
And
Okay.
fall.
they can convene,
Yep.
and they can decide at their first meeting, nope, we're not going to merge. It doesn't
Yes.
make sense. We're not going to do it. And if that happens, they are allowed to look at other areas that they might want to merge with. But they do have, is it 2 years to figure all of it out? I can't remember the.
November 2028 is
Yeah.
the final thing. and
November
that would be
7th,
if
2028.
If they
It'll be-
decide to move forward, that it would move to the voters.
Okay.
The voters in the district where voters in the districts where those mergers are recommended would actually be voting on it in that November election in 2028.
And then we would have the data
Yep.
by, like when we hired that person to work with us, we would have the data to look at what a merger how we would benefit, what the costs are, what the opportunity growth would be. That's
Well, the
great.
data's
Okay.
not just going to show up. I mean, you're going to have to.
Yeah.
The data is an issue.
So we shouldn't decide at that first meeting if we're going to merge or not. We really
No,
should take
definitely
that
not.
full
Have
year
until
to
December 2027 for your final report to be
Yes.
put together. And if that's the
Okay.
report that'll say like, yes, we love mergers, then it'll move to the
Yep.
vote.
Okay.
And if you're like, oh, don't love it, then
But still only a couple months to make that decision.
Well, but then the vote's not till
2028.
November 7th of 2028.
Okay.
So no, I wasn't suggesting that
Okay.
you should not merge and on the
Right.
first meeting you should throw up your hands. I'm just saying that it's not a mandate.
Yep.
No one is mandating mergers here. This is going to be a thoughtful
But
study.
we're giving you resources to make sure that you have thoughtful conversations and that it's facilitated and that you have resources to get the data that you need to
Right.
make sure that you are serving kids the best you can. That should always be number one, and
Great.
at a cost that isn't.
Currently, Burlington
Awful for the
is, again, this isn't necessarily the way it's going to end up, but they are with South Burlington and Winooski in
Okay.
a region. So, which is not too surprising. It makes
No,
sense.
it makes
Yeah.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Okay.
I can
Wow.
go over the big parts of the bill. I know we're kind of all
Sure,
over the
go
place.
ahead.
So CSAs, we're on the same page. Love CSAs. Required merger studies, we just talked about that. Slowing down the finance reform timeline, that was what we talked about, bumping it to 2030 to make sure that we are not flipping any switches just yet before some of these bigger conversations happen.
Great.
Pre-K access and equity, there's a piece in there. Yes, we may have some, I don't know, full-throated support on that part, but anyway, it's in there. I can go into a little bit more detail if need be. There is support for small and sparse schools. The bill creates a new grant formula, especially for schools that are small or in sparsely populated areas. Because we heard a lot from people who were in those towns that you mentioned that were like, hey, you can't go across the river because there's not a bridge there, and I can't, some really unique concerns in areas that have small and sparse schools. Regional property assessment reform was part of it, and special education protections. Those are the 7 areas that were tackled by this large bill.
And then
and then
those 7 areas. And then what about the Senate? Are you guys just then looking at those?
So,
parts of those?
it's already been passed out of Senate Education, and it's pretty much stayed whole cloth from
Great. Okay.
from the House. Now it's coming to Finance. Technically, in the Finance Committee, we're not supposed to be looking at education, policy. We're supposed to be looking at the finance. Half of the bill is tax policy and school construction, at least. So that's what we're supposed to be focusing on in finance. That said, committees don't always stick to that rule, and so it'll be interesting to see what we do this week, but it's supposed to be a pretty quick turnaround. So yeah, we will see what happens there. But I do, getting back to pre-K, I think I am disappointed personally. I think it's a missed opportunity. There were some of us who were really hoping that our pre-K system could become part and parcel of our pre-K to 12 education continuum, right? Because we do have schools that certainly have space in them because of our declining enrollment. We have these incredible pre-K teachers who are so well versed in their area of expertise. It's a regulated, field, so obviously, we just see great outcomes in the pre-K that is included in public education continuum. So it's disappointing that it looks like we're staying with this public-private partnership, which, again, I understand that in rural parts of the state, it seems important to have sort of private providers, close to home. I get that. But I do think it's a bit of a missed opportunity that we didn't do more, absorbing and welcoming pre-K into our public school system. So that is, would you agree with that?
I would
Is that-
agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the House in our version, we directed the Joint Fiscal Office to complete a study, and so I'm hopeful that it's not the end of this conversation, and that, especially as we're looking into restructuring, like what you said about having more space in some of these schools that have a lower pop,
Right.
maybe they could utilize it for pre-K. Just
Yeah.
coming up with smart solutions. So hopefully this isn't the end of this conversation.
One of the interesting things that I have to point out is just like there are many weaknesses in the bill, but one that kind of made me laugh a little bit was the interactive map. There's supposed to be this interactive map that as we're looking at merging, we're supposed to be able to plug into this, again, this fantastical interactive map that's supposed to tell us, in your current configuration, this is how much your foundation formula would be, and this is how much your tax bill would be. And I've spoken to some folks in the agencies, and they're like, we don't have that interactive map. We don't know what that is. We don't have the capacity to do it. So I'm not exactly sure where that came from and how that's supposed to work, but I have a feeling unfortunately, a lot of the work is probably going to end up in our business offices, which is often the case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know there's lots of talk about our public dollars going into private schools.
Oh, my favorite topic.
Big topic.
It is a big topic.
Yeah, the Burlington School Board is just to sign something in support of really same dollars,
Same rules.
Same rules.
That's right.
So do you guys want to talk a little bit about that? Because I know it is a big topic, hot button topic, I think. And
It's a huge topic.
yeah, and just having, if the dollars follow the students, having the same requirements for them to be able to access a school.
Well, that's the other issue for me with the foundation formula is that as you look around the country and you look at states that have really gone hard with a voucher system, which is basically a private system and typically costs the voters and folks living in these states a lot more money. But it is literally money follows kid.
Yes.
Right.
That's what it is. When the money starts following the student, you open yourselves up to, a lot of public dollars going to private education. And our state in particular, we are eyed by a lot of right-wing groups because we have this loosey-goosey system where money does flow to public and private, and up until recently religious schools, but we know that there are 2 lawsuits out there, so who knows how that's going to end. But we are ripe for this kind of like full-on voucher system, and again, that keeps me up at night.
How many dollars are going to private schools, do we know?
Currently? Well, as I said, getting good data in this state is quite a challenge.
And they don't have to adhere to the same rules. And that's one of the reasons that you're not going to be able to answer that question. I'm jumping right in, is because our public schools and our public school boards, they have to answer to the voters and they have to be completely transparent with their dollars. And the private school system, and that's what I'm going to call it, people call it independent schools, they're private schools. They don't have to be transparent with their
independent, as a matter of
right.
fact.
I mean, the headmaster of one of the independent schools in the Northeast Kingdom right now makes $500,000. So don't think any of our superintendents are making that amount of money, but you really have to do some digging to find out that information because they don't have to abide by the same rules. So it's really hard to give you that information about how much money are they receiving and where does that money go and what's it being used for, because they don't have to adhere to the same rules.
And getting back to the data, that was one of the reasons. There was another reason why we couldn't do our job this summer with the redistricting task force. Was it took us? It was a month and a half before we were even getting the data that we needed. So that's bad. Now that said, Doug Hoffer, our state auditor, has done over the years. He's done a deep dive into like where's the money
he came
going.
out with a good report.
And it's. He typically shows anywhere from $50 to $100 million, but I have heard that it's closer to $200 million. So it is a significant amount of money. We can't ignore it. And there are other problems with the system. For example, as our small rural schools, public schools close, and our private schools flourish because they don't abide by the rules, they don't have to teach every single student.
Yeah, they don't have to accept every student.
And they can have big endowments. They get money from donors and alums that public schools just can't. So they have all of these benefits. So as those small public rural schools close, who's going to take those kids?
Right.
Some of them might be accepted to the private schools, but there will be others for a number of reasons who won't be. And that, again, gives me pause because if those students need to go out of state, sometimes we call that extraordinary special education services. For example, we spend millions and millions of dollars on that.
Yeah.
These students, our kids, need to be educated in the state of Vermont. We want them close to home. We want them getting a good education, and we don't want to be sending them out of state where we don't really know what's happening. And so it's a hot topic. It's an important one. In Chittenden County, we're a little bit immune from what happens in the rest of the state.
But it impacts
the bottom line.
Yep.
And it impacts, to me, the fairness of the system, and it does impact us. But because we don't see it every day, we're not as politically engaged with that issue, and we need to be.
And
Yeah,
we definitely need to
absolutely.
be. And I think, I mean, I didn't know about it. I'll say it. I didn't know about it until I was on the education committee, because it's kind of like this dirty little secret that we have in Vermont, that we are openly funding schools who openly discriminate against kids. And I'm talking about kids who have special needs. Your tax dollars, when you go buy a cup of coffee, are going to schools that do that. And so I think we should definitely be ringing the alarm bells. And I don't care if we're not dealing with it firsthand here in Chittenden County. It should be impacting us all as Vermonters. It goes against what I think we should want our state to stand for.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree.
It's an important piece if we're talking about opportunity and equity and serving all of our students to the best of our ability. And I think if we're really looking, I think one of the goals of education reform, in addition to providing the best education that we can for all of our students, if we need to reduce the amount of money that we are spending because of our increased property taxes, where are we going to be doing it from? And so that is one place that I think is a really good opportunity to pull some of those public dollars back.
Right.
And
Unless
again,
they're playing by the same rules.
unless they're playing by the same rules.
You can level up. 'Cause
Right,
I know there'll be
'cause-
some people who watch this and be like, Mary Catherine, and get all defensive. Look, then if you're playing by the same rules, you have nothing to hide.
Absolutely.
You shouldn't be threatened.
Yeah. Because I do think, how are we going to come up with some of the money that we need to be doing some of these programs that we want to do? So
One last inequity that I'll point out, I do think it's addressed in this bill, is what we call topping off, which is, you often see this in parts of the state where you have, for example, ski academies, which do a really nice job of teaching some of our kids to ski. We just saw that in the Olympics. I mean, it's a big story. Some kids. The problem with topping off is that by the way, it does happen with public schools as well. So this is a phenomenon of our tuitioning system and our non-operating districts, which is I could do a whole other show on that. But topping off is when you have a student going to let's say a ski academy, and the state will pay $20,000 for that kid to go to that ski academy. But that ski academy actually costs $65,000. So that family is coming up with the difference to pay to send their child to that school. Well, I can tell you, my family wouldn't have been able to afford that. We wouldn't have been able to send me or my siblings to a ski academy and pay that topping off fee. So right there's an inequity baked in. And what happens to the kids who live there who can't afford to pay that topping off fee? Where do they go?
right.
So again, that's just another piece of the puzzle that we have here in the state of Vermont that is highly problematic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Clearly,
So
we're
many
both
things.
very passionate
Yes.
about it. But once you see
Yes.
it, you can't unsee it, and it's something that I think does need more attention.
Yeah, I agree.
What do you guys think are some really, we also do have a great educational system here in Vermont. We're talking about all of the things wrong with the system and how we want to change it and things like that. But what do you think that's worth fighting for? What are the parts of our education system that you would love to be sure is preserved?
Our kids.
And
I mean, that's
our
seriously.
kids, our teachers.
Kids and our
I mean,
teachers.
both my kids went through the Burlington school system, and it was fabulous. I mean, along with your kids, and they got a great education. They got a really different education from the one that I had. It was much more. It looked at American history through a much more, frankly, realistic lens, and the opportunities they had with end of year studies. And so for me, I think our school system generally is fantastic. Like, we have great teachers. Our superintendents are rock stars. I mean, I meet with them often and talk with them and listen to them, and they are fantastic. So, but there are, as Mary Catherine said earlier, there are districts that struggle to pass a budget.
Right.
And it's those school districts that we worry about, because we know those kids aren't getting everything that they need, and that is a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's happening in the next couple weeks that we should
Oh,
keep
boy,
our eye
that's
on?
a great
Because
question.
nothing,
Where is this gonna
we
end?
know
It's
we've
gonna end up in
talked
a
about a
committee
lot
of
of things here, but now what
This is gonna
happens?
this is going to end up in a committee of conference. And for those of you who don't know what a committee of conference is, that happens. So bills ping pong back and forth. I feel like I'm just building a Capitol Hill thing here. But if a bill starts in the House, it goes House, Senate, back to House. Because the House starts it, we vote on it, it goes to the Senate, they look at it, they're like, oh, we like this part, we want to change this comma here and whatever. Then it goes back to the House, and we're like, we agree, we concur with the things that you added in there, the things you took away, or we can say we don't, let's go to a committee of conference. And that's when you have 3 people from the House and 3 people from the Senate who are appointed by their respective leaders in their chambers. They come together and they sit in a room and they hash the bill out. And it is very, I will not be on this committee of conference, but it's usually high stress, high stakes, because you are representing your full House, you're representing the full Senate, and then you produce something out of that conversation. And when it goes back to your respective chamber, there's no time for amendments. The House can't say, ooh, I don't really like what the committee of conference did, I'm just going to tweak it a little bit. It's an up-down vote.
And the governor's been saying if we don't draw new lines, he's going to veto it.
And he's going to veto
So-
the budget, too. Like, he's
Yeah.
doing a lot of
He's,
bullying.
yeah.
That's the word.
Yeah. So if he vetoes this bill, and if he vetoes the budget, it'll be a very interesting situation, because that could.
What does happen if
devastating.
everything gets vetoed? What happens
We have a
for
government
next year?
shutdown, for one thing,
Okay.
which would be unprecedented. And in these times, we simply can't afford it.
I'm hoping the governor can see that this has actually been a collaborative effort.
Right.
Folks came together to
We're
put
listening to
together
Vermonters.
a decent bill, and we're listening to Vermonters. We heard loud and clear what they want and what they don't want, frankly. And so this is the work of many months of
Right.
collaboration. So I'm hoping that the governor can lean in. It may not be exactly what he wants, but it's not exactly what anyone wants.
Right. This is what collaboration looks
Yeah.
like.
Yep.
This is a mammoth bill. Do I like every part of it? No, I sure don't. But you know what? It has things in here that I know my voters really care about and my kids really deserve. And by kids, I mean the kids of Vermont. So this is what collaboration looks like. I'm going to step forward and support this. But if he can't, that's not what collaboration looks like.
Right.
That's what bullying looks like. You can't get your way on everything, especially not in the world of politics. It's not the career for you if that's how you think you should engage.
Exactly. That's well said. Kendra, as the moderator of today's show, what would you like to see come out of the session?
I mean, I love a lot of the points in the House. Between the shared services, I think that is a win for everybody, and it has been a proven, data-driven structure that we could use, so we are not just flying by the seat of our pants. I am always for data-driven in modeling and following that. So I love that idea. I think I am concerned about the foundation formula. I think it really has to be studied to see how much money it needs to be in order to be sure that our school budgets and our schools are fully funded. And then the weights, really, I mean, I worry about those weights because we fought long and hard for those weights. So I want that foundation formula and the weights, if we moved in that direction, to be studied and to be looked at carefully as to what we need to fully fund, because we'll be in a similar situation, I think, if we don't fund them. So
As pre-127.
as pre-Act 127.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
So, so lots of moving parts, and what we've all talked about today, until it goes to conference committee or whatever happens, nothing is written in stone yet. But I just wanted to thank both of you for the work that you are doing each and every day for our families and our educators and all of Vermonters. We all are in this. And I think in Vermont, we are for public education, and it is the hallmark of our democracy. It's super important, and we're all going to be watching it closely.
Yeah.
So thank you, guys.
Kendra.
Yeah. Reach out to your senator, reach out to your rep. It does matter. All of our email addresses are public. You can look up the Vermont Legislative website and look up your town and we need to hear from you, and we want to hear from you. But please reach out.
Your voice matters, and we do have an election this year. August 11th is the primary. November 3rd is the general. Is that right?
Sure.
So I know August 11th is the primary.
I'm on House Gov Ops, so I don't know when the
But
election is.
engage with your representatives, with your senators,
And with the governor.
and the
with the
governor. And
Yes,
please
yes.
vote August 11th. And yeah, thank you so much.
Great. Thank you.